The sun hadn't risen yet, and the hangar lights burned through the fog like spotlights. Inside, the rhythmic clang of a wrench echoed off the metal walls, followed by a grunt and the creak of a toolbox sliding open. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter sat cross-legged under the belly of an F-16 Falcon, her coveralls streaked with oil, her ponytail sticking out from under a backwards cap. The rest of the crew called her Hangar Girl. She didn't mind. In a place where everyone wanted to be seen, she was perfectly content being invisible. "Carter, you ever sleep?" came a voice from above the wing. She glanced up to see Captain Ryan Reynolds, one of the squadron's most decorated pilots, leaning against the ladder, sipping coffee. His flight suit looked as crisp as his reputation, Top Gun of the base, the kind who made everything look effortless. "Sleep's overrated," Emily replied, wiping her hands on a rag. "Jets don't fix themselves." Reynolds grinned. "You're gonna burn yourself out one of these days." "Maybe," she said, sliding out from under the aircraft. "But I'd rather burn out doing something that matters." He watched her tighten a panel and shake her head in quiet disapproval. "This bird's not ready yet." They rushed maintenance again. "Your birds are never ready enough for you," he teased. "Because you fly them like they're invincible," she shot back. "They're not. Machines talk, Captain. You just don't listen." He chuckled. "You talk about these jets like they're people. They are to me." Reynolds paused, studying her. There was something different about Emily, a sharpness in her eyes, a mix of precision and fire. She didn't just fix aircraft. She understood them. That night, after the last pilot left and the hangar went silent, Emily stayed behind as always. The air smelled of fuel and steel. She climbed into the cockpit of Falcon 2-1, the jet she'd practically raised from spare parts. The canopy glass reflected her tired eyes as she settled into the pilot's seat. Her hands hovered over the controls, throttle, stick, MFD screens, the familiar dance of switches and levers she knew better than her own heartbeat. She didn't need a checklist. Her fingers remembered where everything lived. In that moment, she wasn't a mechanic. She was a pilot. She closed her eyes and imagined herself on the runway. Throttle up. Afterburner ignites. The vibration hums through her bones. Wheels lift off. The ground disappears. The world opens. She could almost hear the wind, taste the adrenaline. But then she sighed and leaned back. Reality snapped like a switch. Mechanics didn't fly. Mechanics worked so that others could fly. That was the rule, an unspoken law carved into the military's bones. She knew her place, and yet she couldn't stop dreaming. Emily had joined the Air Force at 19, not because she wanted glory, but because she wanted purpose. Her father, a retired aircraft engineer, used to tell her stories about the F-14 Tomcats he worked on during his Navy years. He'd lift her up as a little girl, point at the sky, and say, "That sound you hear up there, that's Freedom's engine, Em." When he passed away, she enlisted in his memory. While everyone else wanted to be pilots, she asked for the mechanic's badge. "Pilots break them," she'd joke. "I fix them." But secretly, she'd always wanted to know what it felt like to break the clouds herself. The next morning began like every other. The base was alive with the buzz of generators, the smell of jet fuel, and the constant barking of orders. Emily walked to her station, a wrench tucked into her pocket and a coffee that tasted more like jet oil than caffeine. Her crew chief, Lieutenant Harris, barked from across the hangar. "Carter, you're on Falcon 2-1 again. Make sure that hydraulic leak is sealed this time. The captain's wheels up at 0600. She nodded. "Already handled, sir." Resealed the actuator and tested the pressure valves twice. Harris gave a skeptical grunt. "You test everything twice. That's why I trust you. Just don't miss breakfast again. You look like a ghost." She smiled faintly. "Breakfast can wait. Planes can't." As she checked the last diagnostic display, she heard laughter echoing from the pilot's lounge. The officers were swapping stories, flight jokes, mission tailies, the usual. Reynolds stepped out, saw her still working, and shook his head. "You really don't stop, do you?" "Not until she sings," Emily said without looking up. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "with all the hours you spend around these jets, I'm surprised you never tried to fly one." She smirked. "Oh, I've tried. Just not with an audience." He blinked, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. That evening, a storm rolled in over the Pacific horizon, painting the sky blood red as lightning flickered behind the clouds. The control tower called for all maintenance crews to clear the tarmac, but Emily stayed behind to finish the pre-flight check. She ran a gloved hand across the jet's smooth fuselage. The aircraft gleamed under the floodlights, silver gray with the tail, number 2117, etched like a badge of pride. "Tomorrow's your flight," she whispered. "Let's make sure you're ready, girl." She gave the canopy a light tap and smiled. Then thunder cracked so loud it rattled the hangar doors. She flinched but laughed. "Guess you're just as impatient as me." That night, she walked back to the barracks alone, rain soaking her boots. The distant rumble of engines lulled the base into a strange kind of calm. But inside Emily's chest, something restless stirred. That same tug she felt since childhood, the one that whispered she was meant for something more. She tried to ignore it. She told herself she was happy where she was. But deep down, she knew she was lying. Because every time she heard the roar of takeoff, her heart ached to follow. Every time she saw a jet return, wings scarred from the sky, she wished she'd been up there with them. At dawn, she woke before her alarm. The storm had passed, but the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. When she reached the hangar, something in the silence unnerved her. The birds weren't singing. The wind was still. Reynolds was late. The tower was quiet. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last peaceful moment she'd ever know. As she began her routine checks, a low tremor rippled through the concrete floor. She froze. The tools in her hand rattled. Then came the sound, distant, growing, not thunder. Engines, many of them. Her radio crackled alive with static and shouting voices. Base alert. Unidentified aircraft inbound. This is not a drill. Emily's wrench dropped to the floor. Sirens wailed across the base. Airmen ran in every direction. And for the first time in her life, Emily Carter didn't think about engines or mechanics. She looked up at the sky and saw smoke blooming over the horizon. In that instant, the girl who fixed jets was gone, and the woman who would one day fly one was born. The first explosion hit before the alarms did. A thunderous boom rolled through Anderson Air Base, shaking every metal beam, every hangar door, every soul on the ground. Emily Carter's wrench clattered from her hand as the floor trembled. The lights above flickered. Somewhere outside, a klaxon began to scream. "Base under attack. All personnel to stations. This is not a drill." The voice on the loudspeaker was sharp, panicked, the kind of voice that never lied. For half a second, Emily stood frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. Then she ran. Outside the hangar, the sky was already on fire. Missiles streaked overhead, glowing like comets. Columns of black smoke rose from the far end of the runway, where the fuel depot had taken a direct hit. The air smelled like burning oil and melted metal. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the ground crewmen beside her, his face pale as chalk. Another explosion shook the airfield. A shockwave of heat and debris sent everyone diving to the ground. Shards of glass rained from the control tower windows. Emily coughed, tasted smoke, and pushed herself up. Her instincts screamed, "Move. Get to the shelters," yelled Lieutenant Harris, sprinting across the tarmac. "Let's go, people." But Emily wasn't running toward safety. Her eyes locked on Falcon 2-1, the F-16 she had finished tuning barely 30 minutes earlier. It sat there on the open tarmac, prepped for takeoff, engines still cold, the ladder still in place. And Captain Reynolds, the man assigned to fly it, was nowhere in sight. "Captain Reynolds!" She shouted, scanning the smoke-filled air. "Reynolds, where are you?" The only answer was chaos. Soldiers shouting, fire trucks roaring, sirens blaring. She grabbed her radio. "Maintenance to tower. What's going on?" Static. Then a faint, broken voice. "Multiple hostiles inbound. Drones and fast movers. Reynolds down near East Hangar." "Repeat. Pilot down." Her stomach dropped. Reynolds, the only pilot assigned to Falcon 2-1, was out of commission. Emily looked at the jet again. The refueling hose still coiled by its side, the canopy open. It was ready. Every switch checked, every system primed. Then the comms officer's voice cut through the air. "All available aircraft scramble immediately. We need birds in the sky now." Around her, pilots ran toward damaged planes. Mechanics scattered for cover. One of the junior techs, a kid barely out of high school, stumbled toward her. "Carter, you need to get underground." "Where's Captain Reynolds?" she demanded. "They said he's not coming. He's hurt bad." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded. If Reynolds was down, Falcon 2-1 would never leave the ground. And if no one got in the air soon, the entire base would burn. Another missile screamed overhead and hit the western runway. The explosion was deafening. Fire roared like a monster unleashed. Through the chaos, she heard Harris again, yelling orders. "Carter, get to the bunker, now." But she didn't move. Her eyes were still on the jet, the one she'd cared for, tested, repaired, memorized like a heartbeat. The ladder to the cockpit gleamed under the flickering lights. The engine panels she'd bolted down just this morning still shone with new rivets. Everything in her body screamed no. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't trained. She wasn't cleared. But deep down, something else whispered louder. "You know this jet better than anyone. You can do this." She turned back toward the hangar where Harris stood shouting. "Sir, we don't have any active birds up," she called. "Then we wait for backup," he barked. "There won't be a base left to defend if we wait." She shot back, her voice shaking but firm. He started toward her, but a second explosion tore through the runway behind him. Harris dove for cover, the shockwave knocking her backward. Smoke, heat, fire. Emily stumbled to her feet and looked again toward Falcon 2-1. Her decision was made. She sprinted. Through smoke and falling debris, she ran for the jet. Her boots pounded the pavement. The roar of engines and the hiss of fire surrounded her. When she reached the plane, she climbed the ladder 2 steps at a time and dropped into the cockpit. Her hands trembled as they fell into motion. Instinct more than thought. Battery on. Fuel pump engaged. Engine start. The familiar hum filled the cockpit, like the heartbeat of something alive. "Control, this is Falcon 2-1. She paused, realizing how insane it sounded. Mechanic Carter. "We're under attack. Requesting immediate taxi clearance." For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice cracked back, confused and disbelieving. "Who did you say this is?" "Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, maintenance crew. Captain Reynolds is down. The jet's operational. I can fly it." "Negative, Carter. You are not authorized. A missile detonated near the control tower mid-sentence. The radio went dead. She stared at the controls. Smoke billowed across the runway. Flames reflected off her canopy. Authorization denied, she muttered under her breath. Fine, I authorize myself. Her right hand wrapped around the throttle, her left on the stick. She'd practiced this 100 times in her head. Now, it was real. All right, girl, she whispered to the jet, voice shaking. You and me. She pushed the throttle forward. The twin engines ignited with a deafening roar, turbines screaming to life. The jet shuddered, alive again. Ground crew members turned in disbelief. Is someone flying 2-to-1? Who's in the cockpit? They couldn't see her face beneath the helmet she'd grabbed off the ladder. All they saw was the F-16 rolling onto the taxiway, fire glinting off its wings. Falcon 2-to-1, hold position. A voice shouted over emergency comms. But Emily didn't stop. She rolled forward, lined up with the cracked runway, and whispered, "Let's do this." Throttle to max. Afterburner ignited, twin blue flames shot from the exhaust. The jet screamed down the strip, lifting into the air through a cloud of smoke and chaos. She had no clearance, no backup, no co-pilot, just courage. And the sky? As the ground fell away beneath her, Emily's heart nearly stopped. The base burned below, hangars in flames, vehicles overturned, medics rushing through the wreckage. And above, the radar flashed 3 red dots approaching fast from the west. Enemy fighters. Control, this is Falcon 2-to-1, she said through the static. Carter in the air. I'm engaging. No one responded. She was completely alone. For a few seconds, silence. Only the sound of the wind screaming past the canopy. Then her radar beeped again. Locked tones. 3. She swallowed hard, gripping the stick. So this is what it feels like, she thought. The sky's heartbeat. Fear tried to take her. But underneath it, something stronger rose. That same fire she'd felt every time she'd fixed a broken jet. The pride of giving life to something powerful. Now she was that life. Let's show them what a mechanic can do, she whispered, flipping off the safety on the weapons panel. Down below, Lieutenant Harris stood beside the burning hangar, eyes wide with disbelief. Is that Carter? He muttered, watching the F-16 climb into the smoky dawn. Beside him, another airman said, "No way. She can't fly that thing." But then, as they watched the jet bank into the rising sun, the comms channel crackled alive. Falcon 2-to-1 airborne. Target acquisition confirmed. It was her voice. Steady, focused, unshakable. For the first time in her life, Emily Carter wasn't fixing a machine. She was the machine, a woman and an aircraft fused by desperation, courage, and fire. The mechanic had left the ground. The pilot had just been born. The ground quaked beneath Emily's boots as she sprinted toward the flight line. The air was thick with smoke, gunfire, and the deafening roar of chaos. Sirens wailed across the base, blending with the distant rumble of explosions. She could barely hear her own heartbeat over the thunder of jets taking off or being blown apart mid-runway. The base was under full-scale attack. The enemy had hit them fast and hard radar jammers, low-flying drones, and coordinated airstrikes that left communications scrambled. Nobody saw it coming. And now, the base that once felt like home had turned into a war zone. "Carter, get down." Someone shouted behind her. She ducked instinctively as a nearby hangar door blew open, sending a wave of metal debris across the tarmac. The shockwave knocked her to the ground, but she forced herself up, adrenaline burning away the pain. Falcon 2-to-1, the jet she'd been maintaining just hours ago, stood intact near the end of the runway. Its canopy gleamed faintly through the haze, untouched, almost waiting for her. Her pilot, Captain Reynolds, was supposed to be there. But he wasn't. Emily scanned the flight line, no sign of him. Only fire, medics, and bodies moving through chaos. The control tower barked orders through the radio on her belt, but every other word was lost in static. "Carter, where's your section chief?" yelled Sergeant Morris, diving behind a maintenance truck. "Missing," she shouted back. "Reynolds is down. Get to cover." That's an order. But she didn't move toward safety. She looked at the jet again. Falcon 2-1 wasn't just another aircraft to her. It was hers. She had spent months rebuilding its engine, fine-tuning its radar systems, memorizing every inch of its frame. She could almost feel the hum of its heartbeat through the ground. When she looked up, 3 enemy silhouettes streaked across the sky, dark, fast, and closing in. The radio screamed again. All pilots grounded. Hangars compromised. Something inside her snapped. Maybe it was fear, or instinct, or something deeper, something that had been waiting to surface for years. She had always dreamed of flight. And now, flight was the only thing that could save them. She broke into a run. "Carter," Morris shouted, "you're not cleared to." But his words vanished behind the thunder of engines. She reached Falcon 2-1 and climbed up the ladder, her gloves slick with sweat and grime. The cockpit smelled like metal and fuel, familiar, comforting, alive. Her hands trembled as she strapped in, heart pounding like the turbine beneath her. Every training memory, every late-night simulation she'd watched, every word Reynolds had ever said to her about flying replayed in her mind. She flipped the battery switches, one after another, like muscle memory. "Control, this is Carter," she said into the com, voice shaking. "Falcon 2-1 is active." Static. Then, "Repeat, who is this?" "You're not authorized." "Get out of that jet, mechanic." She ignored it. Her fingers danced across the control panel. The systems came alive, lights, radar, avionics, everything in sync. The F-16's engine rumbled to life beneath her, and for the first time, she wasn't standing beside it. She was inside it. "Carter, do not move that jet." "That's a direct order." The controller barked. "Sorry, sir," she whispered. "No one else is left." Throttle forward. The jet lurched. The roar of the afterburner shook the ground. Dust and debris swirled as she rolled onto the runway, adrenaline surging through every nerve in her body. Falcon 2-1, abort takeoff. Control shouted again. "You're not trained to." But Emily pushed the throttle to full power. The F-16 rocketed forward, pressing her into the seat. The runway blurred beneath her. For a moment, fear clawed at her throat. What if she couldn't lift off? What if she killed herself trying? Then, instinct took over. She pulled the stick gently, nose up, and the world fell away. For the first time in her life, Emily Carter left the ground. The smoke and chaos of the base shrank below her. The sky opened, vast and blue-gray, with streaks of fire cutting across it. She had never felt anything like it, terror and freedom tangled together in a single heartbeat. "Falcon 2-1 airborne," she said softly, unable to believe her own words. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" The control tower's voice cracked over the radio. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Not if I can help it," she muttered. Her radar lit up 3 enemy aircraft, fast movers, approaching from the east. They were heading straight for the base. Emily swallowed hard. She knew enough about the radar display to understand what that meant. If those fighters reached the base, no one down there would survive. "Falcon 2-1, disengage. You are not combat qualified." She ignored the voice. Instead, she flipped the master arm switch. Her thumb hovered over the missile controls. She hesitated, then pressed it. The targeting systems came online with a mechanical whine. "All right, girl," she whispered to the jet. "Let's see what you can do." The first missile warning blared shrill and heart-stopping. "Missile lock," she gasped. Her hands moved faster than her mind could catch up. She pulled into a hard climb, flares bursting behind her like shooting stars. The enemy missile exploded harmlessly below, lighting up the clouds. Her breathing was ragged. Sweat dripped into her eyes. "Falcon 2-1, you're hit?" the tower asked. "Negative," she said through clenched teeth. "Still flying." A second radar blip closed in. One of the enemy fighters was on her 6, closing fast. She could almost feel his crosshairs tracing her tail. Emily flipped the F-16 upside down, dove through a cloud bank, and pulled a sharp turn so tight the G-force crushed her chest. Her vision tunneled, but she kept her grip steady. The enemy overshot. She had an opening. She squeezed the trigger. The Sidewinder missile screamed off the rail, cutting through the sky like a comet. Seconds later, the radar ping disappeared, one enemy down. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She'd just shot down a hostile aircraft. Her radio crackled again. "Who the hell is flying 2-1? This is..." "Staff Sergeant Emily Carter," she replied, her voice steady for the first time. "Carter? You're a mechanic." "Not today," she said. Below her, the base was still burning, but alive. She had given them a chance. As she circled back for another pass, Emily realized something deep and unshakable. She wasn't just fixing machines anymore. She was fighting with them. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the sky. She belonged to it. The sky was alive with chaos. Trails of smoke, flashes of light, and the trembling roar of engines filled the air. Emily's pulse matched the rhythm of the battlefield, fast, erratic, and unrelenting. Her fingers trembled over the flight stick, but her mind was razor-sharp now. Every scream from the radio, every flicker on the radar screen, anchored her in one truth. She wasn't a mechanic anymore. She was a pilot, whether she wanted to be or not. "Falcon 2-1, this is control. You need to disengage immediately. You've done enough." "Negative, Control," she replied, her voice low but steady. "They're regrouping. If they get through, we lose the whole base." A pause. Then static. Nobody argued again. 2 enemy fighters streaked across her HUD, breaking formation and circling her like predators. Their maneuvers were precise, fluid. They were experienced pilots, maybe veterans. Emily, on the other hand, had never even flown solo in a simulator. She was improvising every second, fueled by instinct, adrenaline, and years of knowing these machines inside out. She'd fixed these jets. Now she had to become one. "All right, Falcon," she whispered to the aircraft, her voice trembling but resolute. "Don't let me down." The radar screamed again. One of the enemy fighters locked onto her tail. "Missile lock." Her heart froze. She slammed the stick left and pulled hard into a spiral dive. The missile streaked past her canopy, missing by inches. The sky behind her exploded in a ball of fire and pressure that shook the jet like a leaf in a storm. Her breathing was ragged. "Easy, easy," she whispered to herself. Another tone blared. The second fighter was coming in from above. Emily leveled out and cut her throttle, letting the enemy overshoot before slamming it forward again. She fired a short burst from the Vulcan cannon. Bright tracers stitched the sky and clipped the Miji's wing. It spun out, smoke trailing behind it, before crashing into the desert below. Emily exhaled a shaky breath. One down. But there was no time to celebrate. The first jet had looped back around, diving toward her with a vengeance. She pushed the F-16 to full throttle, the engine screaming as it clawed for altitude. Her vision blurred from the G-forces, but she refused to back off. She twisted, dove, and climbed again, her every movement raw but precise, like a dancer who had never been taught the steps yet, somehow knew the rhythm. Her radio crackled. "Carter, you still alive up there?" She smiled faintly. It was Sergeant Morris, his voice faint through static. "Still breathing," she said. "You're crazy, you know that? Tell me something I don't know." Below her, the base was a patchwork of chaos and bravery. Fire trucks raced toward burning hangars. Medics carried the wounded through smoke. And above it all, the mechanic who'd never flown before was now their only air cover. Her radar pinged again. A third jet incoming, fast and low. Emily swore under her breath. Where are they coming from? Control answered this time. We're picking up multiple enemy blips from the east. Reinforcements. You need to get out of there, Carter. Negative, she said firmly. If I bail now, they'll wipe you out before backup arrives. The tower went silent again. Her jet shook violently. She was hit. A warning light flashed red across the console. Hydraulic failure left flap. Smoke curled from the wingtip. The aircraft wobbled, losing balance. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing control. Come on, girl. Stay with me. She rerouted hydraulic pressure manually, overriding the safeties she'd helped design. She knew this system better than any pilot. She had installed it. The controls steadied, though barely. The F-16 groaned under the strain. Let's dance, she whispered, spotting the enemy jet closing in. The enemy pilot fired a missile. A perfect shot. Emily yanked the stick right, released countermeasures, and banked into a dive so steep her stomach lurched. The missile exploded behind her, but the shockwaves slammed the jet downward. Warning alarms howled. She barely recovered before hitting the cloud layer. Her fingers were bleeding from gripping the controls so tight. Her arms ached. But the moment she broke through the clouds, the world seemed to slow. She saw the enemy's shadow crossing below her. Not today, she murmured. She dove hard, locking onto the MiG. The tone in her headset went from low to sharp, target acquired. She fired. The missile streaked forward and struck true. The explosion was so bright, it lit up the entire sky. Her breath hitched. She had done it again, all by herself. The radio was silent for a moment before an awed voice finally spoke. Carter, did you just? Yeah, she cut in softly. 2 down. But even as she said it, she knew the fight wasn't over. Another radar tone screamed to life. 2 more contacts appeared on her scope, new hostiles. She was running low on ammo, nearly out of flares, and her left wing was shredded. Control, she said, breathing hard. How long until reinforcements? At least 10 minutes, the operator replied. You won't last that long. I'll have to. Her eyes narrowed. She thought of the people on the ground, the same men and women she worked beside every day, the ones who had always laughed at her for dreaming of flying, the ones who now depended on her to survive. She leveled out and turned toward the incoming jets. Her whole body was trembling, exhaustion and adrenaline mixing into a strange calm. All right, she whispered to herself, one more round. The first jet opened fire. Tracer rounds ripped past her canopy, bright and deadly. Emily banked sharply, feeling the heat of the bullets graze her fuselage. She rolled under the second fighter, firing a burst from her cannon. The rounds connected, tearing through its tail. The jet exploded mid-her, scattering debris across the sky. 3 down, she muttered, her voice cracking. But the final fighter wasn't backing off. It was smarter, keeping distance, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her radar lock alarm blared again. Another missile inbound. She was out of flares. Emily's eyes darted over the console. There was nothing left to give. Except one thing. She slammed the afterburner, pitching the jet into a steep climb. The missile followed. Her engines roared, straining, until she suddenly cut the throttle and dove straight down. The missile overshot, unable to adjust fast enough, and exploded harmlessly in the sky above. Her jet plummeted. Alarm screamed. The ground rushed up toward her. She pulled the stick back with everything she had. Her muscles burned, vision blurred, but at the last second, the F-16 leveled out, skimming just above the desert floor. The enemy followed, but he was too close. Emily flipped the jet's belly upward and fired her last missile at point-blank range. The explosion ripped through the air, shaking her entire cockpit. Silence followed. The radar was clear. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her hands trembled on the controls. Every muscle in her body screamed in pain. Then the radio crackled. Falcon 2-1. All hostiles down. I repeat, skies are clear. She closed her eyes for a moment, a tear cutting through the soot on her cheek. Copy that, she whispered. Returning to base. The voice on the radio hesitated. You did good, Carter. She smiled faintly through exhaustion. Tell that to the engine, she muttered, glancing at the warning lights blinking red across the panel. Below, the base came into view, scarred but standing. Her jet was damaged, her body battered, but the fire inside her had never burned brighter. For the first time in her life, Emily Carter had found her place, not under the wings, but soaring above them. And though the battle was over, the legend had only just begun. The desert horizon burned orange beneath a bruised sky as Emily Carter guided Falcon 2-1 through the smoke-stained clouds. Her body was numb from exhaustion, but her mind refused to stop calculating. Every flicker on the radar, every strange vibration in the fuselage, every sound that didn't belong, she noticed all of it. The adrenaline that had carried her through the dogfight was fading now, replaced by the grinding awareness that her jet was dying under her. Control, this is Falcon 2-1, she said into the radio, her voice hoarse. Requesting damage assessment assistance. Static answered her. The base's radar had been hit during the last wave of attacks. Communication was barely hanging on. She could see the flicker of flames on the ground far below, the twisted skeletons of hangars and vehicles she'd helped maintain only yesterday. Somewhere down there, her team, the ones who'd teased her about her dreams of flying, were still fighting to keep the base alive. She couldn't let them down now. Warning lights blazed across her console. Hydraulic, pressure low, engine temperature high, fuel level critical. Emily swallowed hard. You've got to hang in there, girl, she whispered to the jet. Her right hand trembled as she adjusted the throttle, coaxing every last ounce of life from the wounded bird. Then the radar screamed. 2 new blips flashed across the screen, enemy reinforcements. Smaller aircraft this time, fast interceptors likely sent to finish the job. Her blood ran cold. Of course, she muttered. They always send more. Her hands tightened on the controls. She could still maneuver, barely. The F-16 responded sluggishly, its left wing riddled with holes and trailing smoke, but the engine still growled with power. All right, Falcon, she whispered again. Let's show them what's left. The first enemy jet dove from above, its guns flashing. Tracers screamed past her canopy, slicing through the clouds. She rolled right, feeling the G-force crush her chest, then fired a burst from her cannon. The rounds missed wide. The return fire didn't. Bullets tore through her left wing, ripping metal like paper. Warning alarms erupted. She felt the jet shudder violently, a deep groan echoing through the cockpit. One round nicked the canopy, leaving a spiderweb crack inches from her face. Her oxygen mask fogged from her breath. Her voice trembled. Come on, come on. The second enemy jet looped around behind her. She pulled into a sharp climb, the jet screaming in protest. Her instruments flickered half the systems were failing. Carter, talk to me. The radio crackled suddenly. It was Sergeant Morris. We see smoke up there. What's your status? I've got company, she said through gritted teeth. 2 hostiles. I'm still in the fight. Emily, your bird's on fire. You need to eject. Negative, she snapped. If I punch out now, they'll hit the base before reinforcements arrive. There was silence for a moment, then a quiet, resigned voice. Then make it count. Emily smiled faintly. Always do. She rolled the F-16 into a half-loop, diving straight toward the nearest enemy. The air screamed past her canopy as she armed her final missile. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. Lock, lock. The radar tone steadied. She fired. The missile streaked forward, cutting through smoke and sunlight, and struck home. The first enemy jet vanished in a ball of fire. One down, she whispered. The explosion rocked her own jet, sending it spinning. She fought the controls, struggling to stabilize. Her muscles screamed from the effort, but she refused to let go. The second enemy pilot wasn't wasting time. He dove straight for her tail, his cannon spitting fire. Bullets slammed into her fuselage, tearing open a fuel line. A trail of flame burst from her right wing. Emily coughed as the cockpit filled with acrid smoke. She flipped switches in desperation, cutting off the leaking line. The flames subsided, but the damage was done. The F-16 was bleeding power-fast. Come on, stay with me, she pleaded. She pushed the nose down, using gravity to gain speed. The desert floor loomed closer. The enemy followed, relentless. Every second felt like borrowed time. Her hands moved automatically, checking pressure, power, altitude. The training she'd never received was coming to her anyway, years of listening to pilots, memorizing systems, absorbing everything she could from the sidelines. Her heart pounded. If I can't outfly you, she murmured, I'll outthink you. She banked left sharply, then killed her throttle completely. The enemy pilot overshot her, surprised by the sudden deceleration. Emily slammed the throttle forward again, flipping the jet behind him. Now she was on his tail. Her cannon was almost dry. She squeezed the trigger anyway. The rounds tore through the sky most missed, but one lucky burst caught his engine. Smoke trailed from his tail. Got you, she whispered. The Meg tried to climb, struggling to escape. Emily stayed on him, pushing her wounded jet beyond its limits. Her engine roared, sputtered, then caught again with a violent jolt. She could smell fuel, metal, and ozone. The enemy tried to pull into a tight turn. She matched him, teeth gritted, vision narrowing. Then her cannon clicked empty. No rounds left, she breathed. You've got to be kidding me. Her radar lock beeped again. The enemy still had missiles. She was out of weapons, out of flares, nearly out of fuel. But she wasn't out of nerve. All right, she said softly. Time for something stupid. She cut the engine completely, letting the jet fall into a dead stall. The sudden loss of speed made the enemy missile overshoot, exploding harmlessly above. Then she reignited the afterburner, the force slamming her back into the seat. The F-16 roared upward from the smoke like a phoenix. The enemy tried to react, but she was already on top of him. She dove straight down, closing the distance until his tail filled her canopy. Too close for missiles, she whispered. Switching to physics. She rammed her right wingtip against his stabilizer as they crossed paths. The impact sent a violent shudder through her entire jet. The enemy's aircraft spun out of control, breaking apart in midair. Emily fought to steady herself. The F-16 bucked wildly, alarm screaming in every tone imaginable. Her vision blurred as G-forces pressed her down. When she finally leveled out, she was alone again. The sky was empty. The radar was clear. For a moment, there was only silence broken only by the steady hiss of her damaged oxygen line and the ragged beat of her heart. She looked down at the base. It was still there, smoking, battered, but standing. "Control," she croaked into the radio. "All hostiles neutralized." "Repeat, skies are clear." There was no answer. The comms were dead again. Her cockpit was filling with smoke now, the engine temperature flashing into the red. Every light on the console blinked in angry protest. She coughed, fighting to stay conscious. The world outside shimmered through the heat haze. She knew she couldn't keep the jet in the air much longer. "Guess it's just you and me now," she whispered to Falcon 2-1. Her gloved hand brushed the console like a goodbye. "We did good." She turned the nose toward home. The base runway stretched in the distance, a thin silver line through the smoke. Her landing gear indicator blinked red damaged. Didn't matter. She was bringing it home anyway. As she descended through the final layer of clouds, the sunlight broke through, lighting the broken desert below. The fire in her wings flickered, but held. The jet shuddered with every gust of wind, metal grinding and groaning in protest. But somehow, impossibly, it still flew. Emily exhaled slowly, steadying her grip. Behind her, the horizon burned with the remains of battle. Ahead of her, home waited, fragile, scarred, but alive. And between them, a lone mechanic-turned-pilot, guiding a crippled bird through fire and smoke. The fight wasn't over yet. The hardest part, the landing, was still to come. The cockpit smelled like burning metal and smoke. Emily Carter's breathing came shallow and fast through her oxygen mask. Her hands, slick with sweat and blood, gripped the controls of Falcon 2-1, the once proud F-16, now coughing through the sky like a wounded animal. Warning lights blinked across her console in angry reds and oranges. Engine failure imminent. Fuel critical. Hydraulic system offline. Every fiber of her body screamed to eject, to give up, to save herself. But she couldn't. Not when the base still needed her. Not when the skies behind her might hold more danger. Her radio crackled to life. Falcon 2-1. This is Control. Carter, do you copy? She exhaled in relief. The voice was faint, distorted, but real. I copy, she rasped. Returning to base. Birds hit bad. Understood, the controller said, static swallowing half the words. We've got eyes on you. You're trailing fire, Carter. You need to eject before. Negative, she interrupted, shaking her head. I'm not leaving her. A pause. Then, Emily, you won't make it if that engine quits. She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the smoke-filled horizon. Then I guess I'll glide her home. But the war wasn't finished with her yet. Her radar blinked again, faint, intermittent, but unmistakable. A single hostile signature. One last enemy jet, approaching from the west. Her heart dropped. You've got to be kidding me. Control came back, panic in the operator's tone. Falcon 2-1, we've got an incoming contact fast mover, heading your way. I see him, she whispered. Her hand moved automatically to the master arm switch, but the missiles were gone. Her cannon was dry. She had nothing left but an almost dead aircraft and her own stubborn will. Carter, you're out of ammo. Get out of there. She didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the blip on her radar grow closer. She could almost imagine the enemy pilot smiling, thinking she was easy prey, a crippled bird limping home. But Emily Carter wasn't done fighting. She cut her remaining power and descended low, skimming the desert floor. Sand whipped across her canopy as she pushed the F-16 to its limits, trying to hide below radar range. The wind howled through the cockpit cracks. Every movement made the jet groan like it was in pain. The enemy's shadow appeared overhead, a sleek MiG-29, black against the setting sun. He spotted her. A missile streaked from his wing, slicing through the air toward her. Missile lock. The system blared, though half her sensors were dead. Emily yanked the stick, diving hard and releasing what few countermeasures she had left. The flare burst behind her in a flash of white heat, just enough to confuse the missile's guidance. The explosion missed her by 50 feet, close enough to rattle her bones. The shockwave sent her jet spinning. She fought the controls with everything she had, muscles screaming, vision narrowing to black edges. Come on, come on. The F-16 leveled out, barely. Her breath came ragged. You missed, you bastard, she muttered under her breath. The MiG looped around for another pass. This time, she didn't run. Emily slammed the throttle forward, what was left of it, and climbed straight into the sun. The blinding light washed out her canopy, but she knew what she was doing. Her damaged jet couldn't outrun the MiG, but maybe it could outsmart it. Let's see if you can keep up, she whispered. The MiG followed, closing fast. At the peak of her climb, she killed the engines completely. The sudden loss of thrust made her jet drift upward, weightless for a heartbeat, before gravity claimed it again. The MiG shot past her, its pilot not realizing what she'd done until it was too late. Emily flipped her jet into a nose-down dive, gravity slamming her into her seat as she pointed straight toward the earth. The MiG was right above her now, trying to recover from his overshoot. She had no missiles, no bullets, no flares, nothing but steel and speed. Her jaw clenched. You wanted me? Come and get me. The enemy dove after her, matching her descent. The two jets tore through the clouds, leaving twin trails of smoke, predator and prey, though at this moment, it was impossible to tell which was which. Emily waited, counting the seconds in her head. Her altimeter screamed warnings. They were less than 2,000 feet from the ground. Too close, she muttered. Then, at the last second, she pulled up hard. The F-16 strained, metal screaming, wings threatening to tear apart. Her body compressed under crushing G-force. The MiG tried to follow, but its pilot was too slow. The jet clipped a ridge, exploded in a blinding fireball, and disintegrated across the desert. Emily didn't even have time to look. Her own jet shuddered violently, engine sputtering with metallic groans. The explosion's shockwave had knocked something loose. The warning panel flashed the words she'd been dreading all day. Engine failure. Falcon 2-1, this is control. The voice shouted in her headset. Carter, your engine's gone. You need to eject now. She shook her head weakly. Negative control. I'm almost home. Her engine coughed once more, then went silent. The sudden stillness was deafening. The only sound was the wind rushing past the canopy. The jet began to fall. Emily's hands moved automatically. She trimmed the flaps, adjusted pitch, and leveled the nose. She'd spent her whole life fixing these systems. Now, every ounce of that knowledge was keeping her alive. Her eyes locked on the airbase, a glimmering strip of concrete in the fading light. It felt impossibly far away. Falcon 2-1, altitude dropping too fast. The tower warned. You won't make it to the runway. Yes, I will, she whispered. Her gloved hand brushed the console one last time. Stay with me, girl. She angled the jet into a shallow glide, fighting the stick with all her remaining strength. The controls were sluggish, heavy. Every second, she lost more altitude. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Her arms felt like lead. The base lights were growing larger, but so was the ground. She was gliding a dead jet, something no one trained her to do. "Carter, eject." "That's an order." She smiled weakly, shaking her head. "Negative, sir." "She's coming home with me." The runway was a blur of lights and smoke now. She dropped the landing gear. 2 wheels locked, 1 jammed. The indicator stayed red. Didn't matter. Her hands steadied. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to one goal. Touchdown. Almost there. The jet hit the runway hard. Sparks flew as metal screamed against concrete. The nose wheel collapsed instantly, throwing her forward. Fire erupted beneath the fuselage as the F-16 skidded down the strip, trailing flames and debris. Emily's vision blurred. The force pressed her chest against the harness, crushing the air from her lungs. She could smell burning fuel, feel heat licking at her boots. But she refused to black out. She yanked the emergency brake handle and guided the stick, holding the jet steady as it screeched to a stop just before the base's perimeter fence. For a long, breathless moment, there was silence. Then she heard shouting. Fire crews raced toward the wreck, lights flashing red and blue. Figures in protective suits swarmed around the burning jet, pulling open the canopy. A rush of cold air hit her face. "Carter, can you hear me?" Someone yelled. Emily blinked, her vision swimming. "Yeah," she murmured, coughing. "I can hear you." They helped her out, dragging her a few steps away before the jet finally erupted in a fiery explosion behind them. The shockwave knocked her to her knees. She turned her head just in time to see Falcon 2-1 engulfed in flames. Her chest ached, but she smiled weakly. "You made it home," she whispered. The medics tried to lift her onto a stretcher, but she waved them off. She wanted to stand, to look. All around her, the base was battered but alive. Pilots, engineers, soldiers, everyone was there. And they were looking at her with awe, not disbelief. The girl who'd never been meant to fly had just saved them all. As her legs gave out, someone caught her, Sergeant Morris, tears streaking down his soot-covered face. "Emily," he said softly, "you did it." Her eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion finally claiming her. "I fixed her," she whispered faintly. "And I flew her too." Then the world faded into quiet darkness. Emily Carter awoke to a harsh, sterile light. Her eyelids felt heavy, as if they carried the weight of the entire mission on them. A steady beep from a nearby monitor was the first sound she registered, followed by the hushed whispers of medics moving around her. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and burned fuel, a ghostly reminder of the events that had nearly claimed her life. Her body ached in ways she hadn't known possible. Bruises and cuts traced a road map across her arms and legs, and the soreness in her chest made each breath feel like lifting lead. But despite the pain, her mind raced faster than her heartbeat, replaying every twist, turn, and life-or-death moment from the sky. She tried to sit up and immediately felt a wave of nausea. "Easy there, Staff Sergeant," a voice said from the side. It belonged to one of the flight medics, young, calm, and efficient. "You took quite the beating out there. The jet's down, but you're alive. That's what matters." Emily tried to focus. "The jet? Falcon 2-1? Gone," the medic said softly. "But you made it to the runway. No one else could have done that. You saved lives today." She swallowed hard. Relief and disbelief washed over her in equal measure. The adrenaline was gone, leaving the raw aftermath in its wake. And with it, the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She was just a mechanic. That's all anyone had ever seen her as. Someone who worked quietly in the hangars, fixing engines, checking systems, and cleaning panels. She wasn't a pilot. She didn't have the training, the years in the cockpit, or the license to fly combat missions. Yet she had just faced multiple enemy aircraft, saved her base, and landed a crippled F-16, a feat that defied every rule she had ever known. Hours later, Emily was moved to a temporary command tent. The base had been damaged, yet its heart remained. Soldiers, engineers, and pilots crowded the tent, their eyes still wide with disbelief. Whispers of her heroics buzzed like static through the air. Some shook their heads, muttering, "She's just a mechanic. How did she do that?" Others clapped her on the shoulder or saluted, their respect etched into every line of their faces. Lieutenant Harris approached, his uniform dusty, his face streaked with grime. For the first time, he looked unsure. The man who had barked orders and demanded discipline from everyone suddenly seemed small in front of her. "Carter," he said, voice low, almost reverent. I don't know what to say. You saved the base. Every man, every piece of equipment. You saved it all?" Emily shook her head, weakly smiling. "I just did what had to be done?" "No," Harris said firmly. "You did what no one else could. You flew that jet like you were born to it. I've never seen anything like it." Her cheeks warmed. Praise had never been her goal. Recognition felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. Yet, deep down, it was impossible not to feel a swelling of pride. She had faced the impossible and won. The aftermath was chaotic, but quiet in its own way. Teams worked tirelessly to put out fires, repair communications, and secure the perimeter. Emily wandered the base, still dazed, taking in the destruction. The hangars were scorched, the tarmac pitted with missile impacts, and pieces of twisted metal lay scattered like relics of the battle. Yet amid the ruin, life went on. Soldiers carried on their duties. Engineers recalibrated systems. And somewhere, children of the base personnel peeked through fences, wide-eyed and curious, perhaps unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Emily paused near the runway where Falcon 2-1 had finally come to rest in its final, shattered state. Flames had long since been extinguished, leaving a blackened carcass. She ran a gloved hand over the scorched fuselage, imagining the roar of the engines, the wind rushing past her face, the near-death experiences she had endured just hours ago. "You okay there, Carter?" She turned to see Sergeant Morris, dust-covered and exhausted, watching her. There was admiration in his eyes, mixed with the awe of someone who had witnessed history firsthand. "I will be," she said quietly. "She fought well. I just guided her." Morris shook his head. "You guided her? You took her into combat. You took down multiple enemy aircraft. You are the reason everyone's alive. That's not just guidance." Emily smiled faintly, a strange mixture of humility and disbelief coursing through her. She had always loved these machines, fixing them, understanding them, but never imagined she'd pilot one in life or death combat. And now, somehow, she had. Later, the commanding officers arrived. General Whitmore, a stern man known for his no-nonsense attitude, looked at her like he was assessing whether she was delusional or heroic. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said formally, "I understand you took it upon yourself to engage the enemy and land a damaged F-16. Is this true?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Captain Reynolds was down. The base, the personnel. They needed someone in the air. I did what I had to do." The general studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, a small smile tugged at his lips. "You saved lives today that we can't quantify. That's remarkable." Emily blinked. She wasn't used to being called remarkable. She had been a mechanic her whole life, a background role. Never the star of a mission, never the one in the spotlight. And yet, here she was, Later, as the base settled into quiet chaos, Emily was finally able to sit and rest. She looked out the tent flap, watching the orange and pink sunset over the damaged runway. The hum of generators, the distant voices of soldiers, and the soft whistle of wind across the desert sand created a strange symphony of survival. Her heart still raced, but the adrenaline had faded. Fatigue weighed her down, but it was a satisfying weight, the kind that comes after accomplishing something impossible. She thought about the journey, the explosions, the missiles, the flares, the enemy fighters, and the moments she thought she might not make it. Every choice she had made, every instinct she had followed, had led to this point. And now, for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never known, the full scope of what courage could mean. That night, the base gathered around. Personnel who had survived the attack shared stories, some humorous, some harrowing. And inevitably, all roads led to Emily Carter. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into voices, voices into applause. Soldiers clapped her on the shoulder, shook her hand, and saluted. The mechanic who had never flown, the woman who had repaired more engines than she could count, had become a legend in her own right. Emily looked at her hands, still blackened from soot and grease. She smiled softly. It wasn't fame she wanted. It wasn't recognition. But seeing the gratitude, the awe, and the hope in their eyes made her heart swell. Tonight, she thought, the base survived. Tomorrow, they would rebuild. And through it all, they would remember the woman who was just a mechanic, until she proved she could do the impossible. Her gaze returned to the ruined Falcon 2-1, a silent companion who had carried her through fire and smoke. She traced its scorched fuselage with a gloved finger and whispered, "We made it, girl. Together." And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the battle, the base was quiet in a way that felt unreal. The fires had been extinguished, smoke drifted lazily over the tarmac, and soldiers went about their duties with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Emily Carter sat on the edge of a concrete barrier, her uniform rumpled, her hands blackened from soot, and her mind still replaying every moment in the sky. She had survived. The base had survived. And yet, the reality of what she had done was still sinking in. She was just a mechanic, or at least, that's what she had always believed herself to be. Never a pilot. Never a combat hero. Never the person who would fly a jet through enemy fire and come back alive. But the whispers had already begun. Soldiers who had watched her dogfight multiple enemy aircraft spread stories like wildfire. By midday, the tale had reached every corner of the base. Mechanic flies jet, saves base, shoots down enemy planes. Emily tried to avoid the attention, moving quietly through the hangars and tents. But everywhere she went, people stopped. Pilots saluted her, engineers shook her hand, and even the youngest soldiers, who had never known her beyond her maintenance duties, looked at her with awe. "Carter," Sergeant Morris said, clapping her shoulder. "You did what no one else would have dared. You're a legend now." Emily shook her head, forcing a smile. "I just did what had to be done. That's all." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She had gone beyond what was expected, beyond what anyone had imagined she could do. She had flown not just a plane, but the lives of everyone on the base. By the afternoon, the base command post was abuzz with officials, journalists, and military brass. Emily had been called in to debrief, though she wasn't sure how to explain what she had done without sounding reckless. General Whitmore entered, his expression stern but tinged with admiration. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he began, "the actions you took yesterday were extraordinary. You went beyond protocol, beyond orders, and yet you saved countless lives. You've rewritten what we thought possible for anyone in your position. Emily's stomach tightened. "Sir, I saw what was happening, and I acted. I didn't have a choice." Whitmore studied her, as if weighing her words against the chaos she had survived. "Perhaps you did have a choice," he said slowly. "But courage isn't about choice. It's about action when no one else is willing or able. You acted. And for that, you've earned not only our gratitude, but the respect of the entire nation." Emily blinked, overwhelmed. Recognition had never been part of her world. She was a mechanic, not a hero. And yet, there it was, pressing down on her like the weight of the sky she had just flown through. The news spread fast. Within hours, footage and reports of the attack and her daring flight circulated across military channels and civilian media. Headlines screamed, "Mechanic flies jet into combat. Saves base. F-16 miracle. Woman mechanic becomes unexpected hero." From hangar to hero, Emily Carter defies the impossible. Emily watched the news reports with a mix of disbelief and humility. The commentators spoke with awe, replaying radar images, flight paths, and intercepted communications. Pilots speculated on how she had managed to defeat multiple enemy aircraft with minimal weapons. Engineers marveled at her instinctive mastery of systems that even some pilots struggled to operate under duress. She felt the weight of it all. The nation was watching. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about the people on the base, the ones whose lives had been saved. She hadn't done it for fame, only for them. Weeks passed, and the base began to rebuild. Falcon 2-1 was written off as a total loss, but Emily had already visited the new hangar where a replacement F-16 awaited. She ran her hands over the pristine metal, the engines idle and gleaming, and felt a strange pang of nostalgia for the jet that had carried her through fire and smoke. "You'll never fly the same way again," Morris said, standing beside her. "Not after yesterday. They'll always expect more." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time someone proves that limits aren't what we think they are." Her words carried weight, though she didn't yet realize just how far they would reach. Months later, Emily was invited to speak at a military ceremony in Washington. D.C. Her uniform was pressed, medals pinned carefully over her chest. But she still felt the nerves she had felt on the tarmac during her first flight. This wasn't just about her. It was about what she represented: the courage, ingenuity, and spirit of those who were often overlooked. Standing before rows of officers, dignitaries, and reporters, Emily spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I never trained to be a combat pilot," she began. "I'm a mechanic. I've spent my life fixing these machines, studying them, making sure they worked. Yesterday, I had to become more than what I thought I could be. And so can anyone. Courage isn't about your job, your rank, or your title. It's about stepping up when the moment demands it. And sometimes, it means doing the impossible." The room erupted in applause. Officers and officials stood to honor her bravery. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled for statements. And across the country, her story inspired countless people, men, women, and children, who had once believed that courage belonged only to those with authority or training. Emily's life changed forever. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Force Cross, honors that recognized her extraordinary actions. Interviews, articles, and speeches followed, but she remained humble. She still preferred the hangar to the spotlight, the sound of engines to applause. Yet everywhere she went, people saw her not just as a mechanic, but as a symbol, a reminder that heroes can come from the most unexpected places. Back at the base, the story of Falcon 2-1 became legend. Pilots joked about a mechanic who could fly better than any of us, while engineers quietly added her techniques and insights into training manuals. ensuring that future generations could learn from her ingenuity and courage. One evening, Emily stood again at the edge of the runway, looking at the stars beginning to pierce the night sky. The desert was quiet, peaceful, almost serene. Memories of the battle, the roar of engines, and the smell of smoke lingered, but they no longer carried fear. Falcon 2-1 was gone, but she carried its spirit. She had faced the impossible, survived, and returned to tell the tale. She was no longer just a mechanic. She was a pilot, a hero, and a living example that courage and determination could defy every expectation. A faint smile touched her lips. Somewhere out there, Captain Reynolds and the other pilots who had doubted her were looking at her story, acknowledging what they hadn't believed possible. And Emily Carter, who had once only dreamed of flying, now soared in the hearts of everyone who knew her story. And as she turned back toward the hangar, ready to continue her work, she knew one thing for certain. Life would never be the same, and neither would she. The girl who was just a mechanic had become a legend.